Welcome to This Explainer. We are taking on a genuinely massive, fascinating task today. We're decoding 4,000 years of Chinese history. We're going to trace the cyclical arc of a civilization that transformed from a primitive agricultural society into the modern, highly complex titan we see today. It's a huge story, so let's get right into it.
I mean, really think about it. How did an ancient empire navigate centuries of literally absolute chaos to become today's global superpower? Because to truly understand modern China, you can't just look at today's news cycle. We have to zoom way out. We have to look at its cyclical past, this deep, repeating pattern of profound unity followed by complete fragmentation.
Okay, let's dive into this. We'll be moving chronologically through 5 key eras: the birth of the Middle Kingdom, the cycles of empire, the century of humiliation, the creation of the People's Republic, and finally, China in the 21st century.
Section 1. Birth of the Middle Kingdom. Ancient Foundations.
Let's start at the very foundation. We are going all the way back to the 21st century BCE, where the Jia dynasty first forms in the Yellow River Basin. Following that, the Shang dynasty emerges around 1600 BCE, bringing us the very first major use of oracle bones for writing. Then, by 1046 BCE, the Zhou dynasty establishes a complex system of feudalism. And then comes a massive turning point in 221 BCE. The Qin dynasty officially unifies China, standardizes writing, and introduces the very concept of an emperor. They were literally laying the groundwork for thousands of years of imperial rule. Now, I want to pause on this number for a second. 4,000. That is the number of distinct characters found on those Qing dynasty oracle bones. To put that into perspective for you, to read a modern Chinese newspaper today, you only need to know about 3,000 characters. It's incredible. It proves that the societal and linguistic foundations of this culture were locked in incredibly early on.
Section 2. Cycles of Empire. Unity and Fragmentation. Now, what's really interesting about this is the repeating pattern throughout this history. It's like a massive historical pendulum, swinging between eras of profound unity and total chaos. But despite being separated by periods of intense division, these distinct golden ages produced massive leaps for human civilization. Take the Han Dynasty, giving us the Silk Road, inventing paper, and establishing Confucianism as a state philosophy. Fast forward past some fragmentation to the Tang and Song dynasties, and we see absolute cultural peaks, incredible poetry, and maritime expansion. Later on, the Ming dynasty builds the famous Forbidden City and sponsors Zheng He's absolutely massive 30-year maritime voyages. Each cycle essentially built an even more splendid history on the shoulders of the last.
But, between those high peaks were some very deep valleys. Take the Three Kingdoms period in the 3rd century. After the Han collapse, China splintered into distinct states ruled by competing warlords. It was a chaotic period of severe polarization. But, actually, maybe because of that chaos, it spurred shifting ideas of freedom and intellectual independence. These chaotic, messy restarts are an essential, albeit painful, part of the cyclical engine of China's history.
Section 3. The Century of Humiliation. Invasion and Decay.
To understand the dark phase of this cycle, we have to look at a massive clash of worldviews. On one side, you have the traditional Middle Kingdom worldview, viewing China as the self-sufficient, civilized center of the world, and largely passive toward outsiders. On the other side, you have the Eurocentric worldview of the time, expanding, imperialistic, and aggressively seeking new territories and markets. When these two completely incompatible value systems finally collided in the 19th century, the friction inevitably ignited the Opium Wars. And that collision triggered this exact era, the Century of Humiliation. It's defined as a period characterized by foreign invasions, lost wars, and unequal treaties from the mid-19th to the mid-20th century. We're talking about events like the Eight-Nation Alliance military actions and the loss of major, vital territories. This specific trauma is literally the historical engine that drives China's modern quest for sovereignty, national dignity, and global power today.
This trauma builds across a remarkably tumultuous timeline. In 1911, the Wuqing Uprising sparks the complete collapse of the centuries-old Qing dynasty. By 1912, the Republic of China is founded. But this stability doesn't last at all. The country falls into warlordism, faces a severe Japanese invasion starting in 1937, and is simultaneously being torn apart by a devastating civil war in the 1940s between the Nationalist Party and the Communist Party.
Section 4. The People's Republic. A modern era begins.
So how did this newly unified state actually evolve out of all that?
Well, in 1949, the People's Republic of China is proclaimed to consolidate rule and build a socialist state. But the ensuing decades were incredibly turbulent. The 1960s and 70s brought Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, a movement that systematically attacked traditional society and ancient Confucianism. Yet, by 1978, we see a massive, game-changing pivot. Gradual economic reforms begin, starting in rural agriculture and eventually expanding to urban areas and coastal cities. This fundamentally changes the country's entire trajectory.
As these massive economic shifts occurred, major social tensions naturally arose, and they came to a head during the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests. Sparked initially by the death of reformist leader Hu Yaobang, the demonstrations swelled rapidly as citizens voiced grievances over high inflation, corruption, and a growing wealth gap. Millions gathered demanding free speech and political reform. The protests reached a climax on June 3rd when a military crackdown resulted in thousands of civilians dead or arrested, bringing the movement to a very abrupt and deadly end.
So, the crucial point is how the government moved forward economically after these turbulent decades. They leaned hard into what they call a socialist market economy. It's a fascinating hybrid system. It's designed to utilize market forces and global trade to rapidly increase productivity while still strictly retaining state control. And from a purely economic standpoint, the impact was unprecedented. This is the exact structural feature that allowed hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens to escape absolute poverty within just a decade or two. It's a scale of wealth generation that's hard to even wrap your head around.
Section 5. China in the 21st Century. A Global Titan.
1.4 billion. You simply cannot understand modern China without really grasping the sheer scale of its population. That's the massive demographic that China's modern system must manage, govern, and allocate resources for every single day. It's an administrative undertaking of a scale rarely seen in human history.
And as you might expect, managing that kind of scale brings incredibly intense challenges. The contemporary dilemmas are severe. We're looking at massive urban crowding, air pollution, and freshwater scarcity. There are toxic hazards stemming from industrial waste and agricultural chemicals. Politically, the sources point to a deep, ongoing tension. The state maintains rigorous social stability and rapid growth, for sure, but this model relies heavily on restricted civil liberties and very strict boundaries on free expression.
Which brings us to a final, provocative thought. Can China's ancient resilience overcome its modern dilemmas of environmental strain and restricted liberty? Throughout this explainer, we've seen a 4,000-year cycle of profound unity, devastating fragmentation, and eventual rebirth. Will this historical legacy of resilience allow it to harmonize its massive socioeconomic growth with a sustainable future? That is the ultimate question for the Middle Kingdom in the 21st century.